Hi again, it's Dr. Aridgo and Dr. Imus from Valley Anesthesia, and we are here on our second podcast. And if you haven't heard our first podcast, tune in to that. We are talking with Dr. Imus about effective ways to learn how to study and not learn how to study, learn how to learn, which is very important when taking tests in anesthesia school or taking tests after anesthesia school, like the CPC exam, or of course boards, or the C exam for students too. A lot of universities are using scores on that. So, in our first podcast, we talked about a lot of the don'ts of, we talked about some tips going forward to get ready to study. Then we talked about some of the ineffective ways to study. And in this podcast, we're going to go over effective ways to study. So we're going to let Dr. Imus talk, because this is a subject he's very passionate about, has done research on, and knows of all the research from other practitioners in this field. So Dr. Imus, give us a list of effective ways to study, and let's talk about some of those concepts so people can integrate that into practice.
Okay. And, when I was looking at how people learn, what's the best strategies, everything that I've taught the students is based off of all research that have been proven over and over again to be successful. It's never like something that somebody told me worked for them, but over and over again, well researched. I think the first one is retrieval practice.
Okay. What is retrieval practice?
Is testing yourself, constantly testing yourself. Again, as we talked about in the last podcast, how do you really know something? Ask yourself about it, talk about it. The more that you do that, the more that you are intertwining those neurons and their connections, and you're beating this path down in your brain every time it goes kind of back and forth. And every time you talk about it and test about it, there's a lot of great research where they've done just testing alone was a great learning strategy, where they compared students that were able to read their notes and read the chapter again versus students that just got tested again. And what they found were the students that got tested again always performed better. So there is something about what you're doing when you're testing yourself. You are pulling that information out of your brain every time you do, and you beat that path down. So then it becomes a very easy, you have easy access to it. For instance, when you're taking your board exams or you're taking a test in anesthesia school, the more times that you retrieve that, the more you're going to create those connections.
So when you say testing, do you mean like I study it first and then I should go to a test, say if a prep course has questions and answers, study it first, then go to the section that relates to that and take a test to see what you know and don't know?
Yeah, so that's one way to test yourself.
Okay.
You read a section and you just testing yourself is, can I put this in my own words? Can I talk about it? Can I understand it? That is, another form of testing yourself. Okay. Meaning, do I understand this information? Whether it is sitting down and actually taking, a multiple choice test, or you sitting and handwriting it in your own words, what this concept means to you. How do you understand this? That's all kind of testing yourself.
Okay.
And when you're doing that, when you're writing it down and doing, whatever your notes, you're not looking at the book. You're pulling it out of your head, because then you're just copying.
Right.
So that's not going to really help you. You want to be able to try to pull it out of your brain as much as you can. And maybe the first time you try to learn this concept, you don't write very much on it. And you have to go back and look. Okay, now, okay, I get that piece. Then you go back again and you just write
Try
about
and
it
write down everything you can remember.
until you can kind of like, yes, I understand this, I can talk about it. And that is the retrieval practice. It's going to tell you, you know, if you know or don't know something.
Sure. Okay.
And so
Great. I
constantly
understand.
doing that.
Okay, what's another effective way to study?
So we have a thing called spaced practice.
Okay,
So,
what's spaced practice?
so spaced practice, and I'll give this example sometimes to the students. Do you think it's better to study like the gas machine for 4 hours on Friday or for 30 minutes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday?
I'm sure they all say the second way.
Right. Well, but that's not how we like to learn is we want to almost cramming. We want to sit down there and we're going to learn this until we know it and we're not leaving until we understand it. And that's going to make us feel good. That's going to make us feel comfortable. You're better off spending shorter amounts of time and going over, let's say going over the anesthesia gas machine. I'm going to spend 30 minutes on it going over it on Monday. Tuesday, you come back in, you don't have it mastered, but you have it a little bit better. And every time you do that, all during the week, you're beating down that path again. What they've shown with that spaced practice is they've done all kinds of different studies where they had students study where they're studying the subject 4 hours until they get it, to where they did it more of a spaced practice, 30 minutes a day. And in the long term, and which really matters for students and for anesthesia providers, is that they were able to recall it years later when they learned it by spaced practice. And so again, not comfortable, because how we like to learn is I'm going to learn this until I know it, and then I'm going to move on. The
Right.
problem is you may not look at that now for about 2, 3, or 4 weeks. And what I tell the students is when you do that, you're no longer reviewing, you're relearning, which takes a lot more time.
Good point.
So take the time to, hey, for 30 minutes, I'm going to study the gas machine. And that this dovetails into the interleaving of topics. So let's say I am going to spend 3 or 4 hours studying. It's not going to be all on one subject. Okay, let's study, these different components of the gas machine. Then let's study a couple different pathophysiologies of cardiac. And then let's look at 3 or 4 of the different gas laws and, interleaving of topics. Again,
Which is the third concept, right? Interleaving of topics. And
they did a study with baseball players, I believe at Caltech, where they took them and split them up, and half the group got 100 pitches, and the other half got 100 pitches. But the first group got them 30 slow balls, 30 fastballs, 30 like changeups. The second group got the same amount of pitches, but they were all over the place. Maybe they got 2 fastballs, then 1 changeup, then 1 slow ball. They never knew what was coming. In practice, you can think who did better. It's the ones that knew what was coming. But what they showed during their season is their batting average for the ones that trained that way was significantly higher, because they were constantly having to adjust. Wasn't comfortable, but in the long run, it worked out. And that's that interleaving of topics, of jumping to something else, and then jumping to something else. And then the space practice would be the next day, doing the same thing with different subjects.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense for both of these topics, space practice and interleaving of topics, because physiologically, right, we have our short-term memory in the hippocampus, and when we're doing everything all at once, we're engaging the hippocampus, and then we leave it for weeks and never go back to it. So it never really makes its way to the neocortex, which is where we're going to lay down those long-term memories. So if we do that space practice where we keep coming back to things every day, we're sort of signaling to the brain, hey, this is important, remember this. And if we're doing, the interleaving of topics, we're making connections between things that maybe we didn't see before, which helps us lay down those memories in the long term in the neocortex. So that really makes a lot of sense that those baseball players would do better over the season because they were subject to adjustments over and over and over again, as opposed to, that very, just that one knowing what was coming was not helpful. So I really agree with you. And I tell the students that, when they were students in the classroom, I would tell them they really need their study time every day should include all of their courses, divide it up. If you have a test coming up in A&P, then, maybe spend half your time on A&P, but you should still be looking at farm, and you should still be looking at health assessment, because you can have those moments of interleaving of topics that help bring things together and solidify in your mind, but you're also helping move things from the hippocampus to the neocortex, which means you're going to have long-term recall. Because what I hear from students who are studying boards in front-loaded programs, they get all their material up front, they go to clinical, and they're not using space practice. And then at the end, they have to almost relearn everything, right? Because they've forgotten so much because they didn't take that time to kind of lay down those memories in the neocortex for retrieval later. So yeah, I completely, and I think that's great. When studying for the boards, I tell students to study from each domain every day. You can allot your time differently based upon what your weaknesses are, but study a little bit every day in each of the different domains, because you're going to make associations. That's going to help you remember things in the long run, which is what's important when you are taking that test.
Right. And I think, another analogy I'll use with the students is like, you found this great little fishing hole, and, you have to create this path through the woods to get there. And you love this like fishing hole. And like, so twice a day you're going back, and that path gets beaten down pretty quick, but then you lose interest in it, do something else. You come back a year later, that path you created, it's all grown back, rather than, let's go, maybe every couple of weeks, we'll go down to this fishing hole. And so, yeah, it starts to grow back a little bit, but you're beating it down every single time over time. And it just becomes this great path, rather than creating it all at once. And now towards the end of the quarter or the end of the year, you're trying to relearn it. And, I'll do that with our students. I retest them on most everything, because I'm forcing their hand to go back and look at things.
Oh, they must hate you.
And I tell them, I was like, you're not going to like this, but here's the thing. And I can relate to it, because I'm like, listen, I know if I wasn't going to be retested on something, I got so much going on. Sorry, I'm not going to look at it. So this is my way. I'm going to force your hand to look at it. And so we create new test questions. And every so often, like I taught the gas machine this summer, they're going to get tested again in the fall, in the winter, in the spring. And so I forced their hand to be able to almost do that space practice, to go and constantly be reviewing it. And, people say, well, how do I know when to go back and review it? When it's starting to become a little bit foggy in your head, you haven't forgotten about it. It's not like, what am I looking at here on the gas machine? But it's a little bit, doesn't come as easy. That's when you know, okay, time to go review this again. And you can do that with every one of your subjects.
Yeah, that's a great example, and very effective, something I advocate for too. Tell us a little bit about elaboration. What is elaboration?
It's kind of the way that I'll explain it kind of to the students is, if you're just reading Nagelhout, he owns those words or whatever. You're reading somebody else's work. How can you take that and elaborate on it and make it your own, make it personal to you? For instance, if you're learning the doses of propofol, well, what would be the dose I would give to my grandmother versus a dose I would give, to my child, versus make things personal to you. Once they become personal to you, and again, by that is putting the stuff in your own words, is elaborating on it as well, then you own it. That's yours. You came up with that. That's how you understand it. It's much easier to remember that than trying to remember what another author has written. How do I take what they've written, elaborate on it to where I can understand it and relate it to myself, make it personal so that I will always remember it. I would never forget it because it's personal to me. Right.
And so those are the experiences you can use from clinical or from your practice as a nurse. We're certainly more likely to remember if we've had a certain patient with a certain disease and actually taken care of them. We probably are more likely to recall the medications and how they worked, or the procedures that they had and how that worked. Or if I worked with an ECMO machine, I'm more likely to be able to speak about ECMO care than if I've never worked with it before, right? So anything we can associate to help us remember things is always helpful. And we can kind of pull from our personal experiences, or in your case, you were suggesting even making it personal, like what would I give my grandma? What would I give?
Making it up, especially like that front-loaded program where maybe they don't have any experience in this. So make up an experience in your head, make it personal to you. Make up, wow, I'm sitting in this case and my patient bronchospasms. How am I going to go about dealing with this? Rather than just reading, from the author, these are the steps you want to follow. Put yourself, maybe you've never been in that situation, but you can kind of try to imagine yourself in that situation and follow the steps. How would I manage this situation?
Yeah. Or maybe they had a patient that they cared for that had bronchospasmed, and they saw everything that happened, and they can associate that. The anesthesia part on top of that might be new, but they have kind of the basis to sort of form that memory and start that elaboration process, which kind of helps them in the retrieval process when they need to retrieve that stuff on a test later.
Right. I think there's very few things and I'll explain this. There's only a few things in anesthesia that are totally foreign, but most everything, like volatile anesthetics, probably didn't deal with that. That's an ICU nurse. The anesthesia gas machine. But really, almost beyond that, everything else we're building off of what you've already known, what you've, You've had cardiac before. We're just taking it to another level. You've had respiratory. We're just building upon what you already know. And like you said, now, I can take these more advanced concepts and relate it to what I was dealing with, as a nurse. I think that's what makes us, such good providers, and such that we're able to, we've had this experience as nurses, and we're just taking this new information and relating it to what, we've already dealt with.
Great. Okay, how about another concept? Let's talk, before we get to metacognition, let's talk about growth mindset. Because I think the growth mindset is really important, especially for people who are struggling in testing, or are afraid of testing, or have anxiety related to testing. I think it's very important to have that growth mindset. And let's just talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, one of the things one of the first slides I have when I'm talking to the students is, and I come in there and I'm like, you are not here training for a job. You're not here training for a profession. People lose their jobs, people change professions. You are here training because this is your calling. This was what you were meant to do. And I tell them, always keep that in the back of your head. If this is your calling, nothing will stop you from getting to where you want to be. Absolutely nothing. There may be obstacles you got to climb over and go around, but if this is what you were meant to do, you're gonna do it. There's a great research article where they looked at like some of the top chess players in the world, and they're looking at what were their IQ scores. I can't really play chess, but it seems a little complicated. And it seems like it would be hard to learn how to play that. What the researchers found, that 1/3 of these players have below average IQ scores. And it's kind of baffled them a little bit. And so they went and talked to these chess players to try to get a little bit more information. And what they found in them is they had such an passion for playing chess that it fueled their effort, which ultimately determined their success. And when, people always ask me, what does it take to get through anesthesia school? Passion and effort. And I sometimes I'm hesitant to tell this story, but when I got out of the military and I first started taking classes at the community college, I didn't even get into English 101. I was like an English 75. It took me like 3 or 4 classes to get to English 101. However, and when I got to anesthesia school, there's one thing I knew. It's like, I knew I wasn't the smartest one there. But I knew I could outwork people. And, I ended up graduating the top of my class, not because I had some kind of natural intelligence, but because I knew that I could do this, and I had the passion for it. And so I put in the effort, which ultimately made me successful. And that kind of goes into that growth mindset, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. The fixed mindset is somebody that's like, I've never been good at math, so I'll never be good at math. Where the growth mindset is, I'm not good at math because I need to spend some more time on it. I'll ask that question in class. I'm like, who here can play an instrument? You always get a couple of people raise their hand. And then I'll ask somebody that didn't raise your hand, do you think you can play the guitar like him? You could. If you put in the time and you put in the effort, you could. Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes a little bit into that, a little bit of taking responsibility. But, and I always remember when my oldest daughter, she came home, she's in 10th grade, and she failed her math test. And she's like, Dad, the guy, like, his PowerPoints are all over the place. And he has such an accent, I don't even understand what he's saying. And then like the test questions are like nothing that he's going over. And I was like, sweetheart, if that is going to be your excuse for failure, then you're dead in the water. Because you can't change his PowerPoint. You can't change, how he speaks or how he's teaching. So tell me what you're gonna do. And you have to, as students, you got to take that responsibility and really believe that, this is your calling. You're going to be able to do this. Is it going to be easy? No, it shouldn't be easy. I'll tell the students, it's like, if you feel like you're barely hanging on for dear life, you're exactly where you should be. Because it is going to be stressful. And I always say, embrace the stress. You grab the fear and the stress by the throat and you make it walk with you. You don't try to like dodge it. You're just like, yeah, it's going to be stressful. It's not going to be fun, but I realize that, and we're going to get through this one step at a time. And I really, Carol DeWick did so much great stuff. A lot of great books on growth mindset. She's done a lot of great studies on it, to where if you just believe that, it's almost everything you learned in kindergarten. If you believe that you can do it, you're going to do it. No, the board exam's not going to stop you. Nobody's going to stop you, but you have to believe that yourself. And I think, it's kind of a cool thing, and I tell the students, here's the good news and the bad news. Everything that you're going to accomplish, everything that you need to do to be successful in this program, you already have. Here's the bad news. Everything that you need to be successful in this program, you already have. And because so many people don't want to look at that and turn into that. And, we're always constantly, well, they didn't teach this, or they didn't do this right, or that's not the way I learn. You've got to look within. How am I going to take responsibility for this? How do I change my outlook on it? How I do this. Your mindset. I can change my mindset. You can learn anything you want to. You just got to put in the time and the effort. And again, if you have the passion for it, you're going to put in the effort and you will be successful. And yeah, I love that she's done so much great research, mostly a lot with children and school-age children. But, she's been able to show that when you teach a child about growth mindset, where she taught half a class about growth mindset and not the other half, that their GPA went up by one full letter.
Wow.
Because they believe that they could do that.
Sure.
As soon as you believe that you can't, it's that famous saying, those that think they can and those that think they can't are both probably right. I don't know who said that, but it's a great line. And I believe it, it's true.
Definitely. And that's usually the first thing I say when I do counsel students who haven't passed their boards. I say, look, you're smart. You wouldn't have gotten into anesthesia school. You wouldn't have made it through your whole program if you weren't capable of passing this test. So it's really up to you to believe that you can learn whatever you need to learn and go take the test again and pass. So the growth mindset is absolutely imperative. You have to believe that your intelligence is not fixed and that you're not capable of things. Growth mindset says, I can learn anything. However, it doesn't, like you said, say it was going to be easy to learn anything. I mean, I could learn to be an astronaut, right? But I'd have to learn a lot to be an astronaut. I don't even, even if somebody told me, okay, you got to start here, I'd have to put in tremendous effort and time to get to that end. But if it's something you want, and if you believe in a growth mindset, it's doable. Some people do it really quick too. This is another thing I tell students and stuff. Don't compare yourself to other students when it comes to taking these big tests. This is a solo effort, and you need to know yourself and your abilities. Don't compare yourself. You don't know what's going on in that other person's life. They have a completely different life. You don't know how they studied. You don't know what they studied. You don't know the amount of effort. You just have to look at you And I think that leads us perfectly into the last concept, which is the metacognition. You know, part of that is also interwoven in that metacognition. Tell us about metacognition.
Simply, you know, when I think of metacognition, it's like know when you're learning and know when you're not learning. All right, again, I'll use the analogy of like the gym again. There's plenty of times like I've gotten up in the morning, drove to the gym, get to the parking lot, and then I drive back home. And I'm like, I'm just not feeling this today. And I'm just gonna probably like end up getting hurt or something. Then there's other days where I'm like in like this, I feel really great and I'll stay, you know, extra time and do other things. And I'm in a kind of a, you know, feeling it right then. And so you've got to know that with your learning. If you're sitting there and you're just trying to like, well, I just got to get through the 3 hours, but you're not really feel like you're learning anything, understand that you're just wasting your time. You're going to make yourself more frustrated, give yourself more anxiety because, oh, why can't I get this? And then when you are in this, like the groove of learning, don't feel like you got to shut it off, you know, at a certain time. If you're in a groove and you feel like, man, concepts are just coming, I'm feeling good about this, you keep going, but don't force yourself to try to learn something. If you feel like you're in, you know, you're at that, I just don't feel like this today, or I just don't feel like this right now, take a break, go do something that you want to do, relax, and then come back. Because if you force yourself, you're going to make yourself more anxious, give yourself more anxiety, more stress. Just like if you're at the gym and you just don't feel it, you can end up getting hurt and, you know, cause an injury. So know when you're learning and when you're not learning. And again, this is all kind of like looking within, you know, and again, what you're talking about with, you know, comparing yourself to other students, you know, that's human nature. We always like to compare ourselves and stuff. It is so hard to look within as far as what can I do? What am I responsible for? It's easy to look out. So that is, you know, something that, you know, as a student, and when you're taking that test, don't waste your time on looking out on what other people are doing. What can I do? What can I change? How do I like to study? When do I know that I'm learning and when I'm not learning? And focus on that rather than focusing on what other people are doing and how they're doing it. Because as you said, everybody's a little bit different. How people, you know, deal with stress and that is all a little bit different. I feel a little bit of stress is really good, but you can really kind of cross that line. And when it gets to where you cross that line, it's not good. And I think it's important for, you know, students and everyone to understand we are innately, you know, to be stressful human, you know, stressful beings. And if you look at our ancestors, you know, the ones that were like on the Serengeti singing Kumbaya, those aren't our ancestors. Somebody ate them. The ones that were like, hey, I don't know if we should be going out today, you know, that look at that shadow. That could be like, is that a bear? Is it not a bear? I don't know. Let's stay. Those are our ancestors. So it's ingrown in us that we have this anxiety and this stress. And I say that because I don't want people to feel, you know, especially the students, is there something wrong with me why I'm so stressed? No, that's part of human nature. Don't let it control you though. Don't let it, it's just a part of you, but don't let it drive your ship. Just, yeah, I got this stress, big deal. I see you there. You know, but don't let it, you know, dictate where you're going to go. And I think that's the trap that you can fall into.
And I think along those lines too, because, you know, I know students just get overwhelmed by the amount of material that they have to know just to take these tests, or a CRNA to take the CPC. And this comes full circle back to what's helpful. And you have to get organized, right? So
Yeah.
you can manage that stress. because, you know, the saying goes, you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time. If you think about eating a whole elephant all at once, you're like, there's no way I can't do it. But if you had a plan and you took it one bite at a time, eventually you're there. So it's really important to get organized, have that plan to help you reduce the stress. And I hear students say that too, after we talk and we get their strategic plan ready to go, they just go, oh, I feel so much better because now I know what I'm going to do and how I'm going to attack this, you know, and that just brings the stress level down to something that's manageable. Because like you said, good stress keeps you on your toes. It keeps you in that learning frame of mind. You're optimistic and you want to go out and you want to minimize anything that you feel is threatening, right? You don't want it to get to the point where it's really bad stress, because then you become paralyzed, immobile, you're not learning, you're wasting your time. So that metacognition of knowing when you're learning and when you're not learning is really important. I find students who say, well, you know, I study 8 hours a day, but I take 30 minutes for lunch. And I say, wow, you do like all 8 hours all at the same time without taking a break? And they'll say, yeah. And I'm like, well, on hour 3, how is your learning? Is it really effective? Are you feeling foggy by then? Don't feel guilty about taking breaks. You know, our attention span typically lasts about 50 minutes or something, is I want to say that's what research says. And that's kind of why they have college classes at 50 minutes or so. Just even a 10-minute break to let your brain relax, go throw in a load of laundry and then come back will sort of hit reset and allow you to be much more productive in your learning. But it goes back to that metacognition of knowing, right, when you're learning and when you're not learning. It's so important. And when you're not learning, you got to take a break. Otherwise, you're just kind of wasting your time.
Right. And again, I think you're building up your anxiety, your stress, because you feel like you're not getting it, when, you know, you got to listen to your body and listen to your brain, where it's like, hey, we've had enough. Let's take a break. Let's reconvene and attack this, you know, a little bit later.
Yeah. So great information. Let's just recap real quick here for part 2. So we talked about the effective ways to study, and these would be retrieval practice, where you're constantly testing yourself and what you know and what you don't know, and challenging yourself and trying to go back and repeat to make that what you don't know the smallest amount possible. Then we talked about space practice. It's better to do a little bit every day consecutively than try and cram things all on one day for our long-term learning. And then we talked about interleaving of topics, which is studying a little bit out of each topic every day, looking for connections. Then we talked about elaboration, which involves taking the subject matter and trying to make it personal, adding stories to it, makes it easier to remember in the long run. And then we talked about growth mindset, which means you believe that you can learn anything. Doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, but you believe that you are capable of learning anything in a growth mindset, and you're willing to put the time and effort into it. And then, of course, lastly, metacognition, which is, again, a personal inward view of yourself and knowing when you are learning and when you aren't learning, and to give yourself the time and some space when you're not learning to sort of reset to get back to doing effective learning. So great research on learning how to learn. And we thank you so much, Dr. Imus, for sharing some of your passion about learning. It's going to be great for the students to think about these concepts and start integrating some of these concepts if they haven't in their practice, and hopefully being much more fruitful in their learning time, because time is precious when you're in anesthesia school. So you always want, and even for our working CRNAs who are trying to buff up for their CPC exam, time is precious, right? So you want to have the most effective learning as possible. So we at Valley Anesthesia, thank you so much for sharing. I know at some point we're going to have you back again to talk to us about the neuroscience of learning, because there's a lot of neuroscience all related to learning, and there's a lot of research related to sleep and nutrition and exercise, things that we can tweak there to make us better learners. So we'll have you back to do that. And from all of us at Valley Anesthesia, we thank you for using Valley, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you, Dr. Imus.
Thank you.